it just in line with everything else that's been happening. But I think it's going out. It's going now. Preparing to live stream via YouTube. There we go. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for those who have just joined. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us live. There we go. We are on YouTube now. Okay, great stuff. So we are on YouTube. So for those who know, I am muted. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Alison?
I can.
Right. Can everybody hear me? Somebody said I was muted. Can you hear me now? Yes, you can hear me now. Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you for those who've been here patiently and have responded to my emails and have emailed me this morning. I don't understand how Eventbrite automated system work, and an email went out this morning, and many of you were ready to join at 10 o'clock, which gave me such encouragement, because this took less than 2 weeks to organize and to get us where we are now so we can be talking together. And I'm just really, really grateful. I really appreciate you. Really appreciate you for sharing and for turning up. So my name is Joanna Daniel. I'm a counselor. I'm a trauma-informed counselor. I live in the UK. I live in Wales, actually, in a tiny, gorgeous village in West Wales. And yeah, and I'm going to introduce my guest in a moment. So we were doing a mental health summit 2 weeks ago, and they were talking about the impact of lockdown on BME communities. And as I sat there knowing the skills that I have, wondered what can I do and how can I help? And contacted a few people. Alison was the first to say yes, and everybody said yes, and the conference was born. So here we are today, and you said yes as well, to come in and to learn and to understanding, so we can grow through this together. Now, we know that because of social inequalities, that possibly there's no research yet to show it, but we have to be prepared for what might come. We know that mental health is adversely affected because of the lockdown. People are struggling. So that's why the conference was born. So that's why we're here today. So I want to introduce my guest, who is Alsion Awuku. Love that name. And Alison is an author and a psychotherapist. Her book is on Amazon, and it's called Unique Boundaries for Fulfillment and Success. Thank you so much, Alison. I met Alison last year when we spoke together at a conference. And thank you so much for your support and for being here today to talk to us about this really important subject. So today, Alison and I are going to talk about, my husband just gave me a card that says slow down, because I tend to talk too fast. I'm really sorry if I'm just blazing too fast. I tend to talk too fast. He just give me a note to say, slow down, you're talking too fast. So I'm going to slow down so you can hear me and you can understand. So Alison and I are going to talk about stigma, the stigma around therapeutic services that is in our community. But I'm going to let Alison introduce herself again and just tell us anything else that she wants to tell us about herself before we continue.
Okay, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to actually spend time this afternoon and to look at some of the things that are really pertinent in our community as Black minority people in our environment, in our community. So about me, I didn't start off as a counselor or psychotherapist. I started off in financial services and worked within financial services for over 15 years, but then felt very strongly that there's a need, more and more, there's a need for people just to be appreciated, to be valued, to be listened to. And so started my journey by just dipping my toe gently in the water and just got carried away. And so after years of training and practicing as a counselor, psychotherapist, I write as well. I do quite a few public speaking engagements, and just really enjoying the journey. I have to say, it's been quite a journey. It is quite a journey that we undertake as counselors and psychotherapists, but it's worth it. It's a lot of sacrifices, but it's really worth it. And if you're out there thinking, is this the sort of thing I want to do? Speak to one of us later and we can tell you a lot more about it.
Absolutely. And Alison and I are going to be on a Saturday evening from 9. We're going to do question and answers, just to answer your questions that you have around that. So we're talking about the stigma that is in our community around accessing mental health services. Have you ever heard any stigmas? Have you ever heard anything being said? When I trained first, Alison, as a social worker, and I worked in addictions. One of the things I noticed because of where I was working, that I didn't have any Black male clients, and that worried me because I knew that it wasn't because we didn't have drug and alcohol problems, but I wondered, where were they? And that's when I started thinking again that there's a barrier to accessing services. Why aren't they coming? We know that the problem exists. How come they're not coming? So as we were talking before we came on around the stigma that's attached, we know that there's a view about people who access counseling, like you must be, and somebody just said it in the chat, Black people think if you access counseling, you're crazy. And I think maybe sometimes because we leave it until the last minute to get some help, and by then sometimes medication is necessary. What are some of the stigmas that you've heard, Alison?
Well, just basically, what's wrong with you? You know, fix up, sort yourself out. Why do you need to take your private business and talk to somebody who you don't know? You're strong. You're strong, and you're Black, and we are resilient as a people. We believe in community. We don't believe in airing our dirty laundry in public. And actually, if you've got faith, why do you need to go and speak to somebody? Trust God, pray about it, and it's all going to be fine. So those are some of the things people say. It can't, there can't be anything wrong with you. It's just in your head. It's just in your mind. You'll be fine. You'll be okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean,
I don't know how many of those you've heard, but
I heard a few. They're so jam packed. So many of those. So there are ones around fears. There are ones around faith. Just pray about it. There are ones around the stereotypes of that we know around Black people, and sometimes in particular Black women. You're strong. You don't need it. You're resilient. And I know that none of us was born with resilience. It's built over time. And I think what's called resilience is sometimes our learned behavior to stress, how we stuff it down, how we push it, we put stuff on, and we're out there and we're fine. We appear to be fine. So yeah, I've heard some of those things. As we were saying, Alison, when we were training, we had to get counseling. How easy was that for you was it easy for you to find somebody? And did you also have to deal with those thoughts that you hear, those stigmas that we know is in our community? Did you have to deal with those internally when you were going to find someone?
Okay, so actually, training as a counselor psychotherapist has really opened my eyes in terms of Black culture and the space within which we work. I have to say that there weren't that many Black therapists out there for me to choose from. And so, it was a matter of turning up, finding a counselor or a therapist as quickly as possible to fulfill my training needs, most of which were white middle-class women.
Yes.
And then turning up for the counseling and actually thinking about what do I say? And part of the experience was I realized was about first educating the counselor about my cultural background, about my lived reality as a Black woman, before then explaining what the problem is. And I just remember thinking a lot of the time, this can't be right, because if somebody goes to talk to a therapist about depression and anxiety, that therapist is trained to work with people with those disorders or presentations. Why do I have to train somebody first about my background or my race, and then talk to them about the things that I am going through, or the difficulties or challenges that I am facing. So it's like, you know, first of all, in class, there weren't that many Black people training as therapists, and then
Yeah.
going out there in the field, I appreciate there's now more and more people, and thankfully there's a lot more awareness being created. But it was quite an interesting experience. I have to say that, you know, I've always been aware that, you know, we live in a society where there's difference and diversity, but, you know, training as a therapist, as a counselor, really brought home to me the differences that we experience as a people.
Yeah.
And the, you know, the fact that our reality, you know, the moment we open the door and step out, you know, it doesn't matter what level of education we have. It doesn't matter where we grew up.
That's right.
You're just a Black person before
That's
anything else. And that's not a lived reality for non-Black people, even if they're from a different culture.
Sure.
And so then I had to learn about how we are perceived as a people, and then understand how that impacts on us as a people as well. And from a mental health perspective, the traumas with a little t that we accumulate as we go along the way. So it doesn't have to be a big event, but, you know, just the things that happen on the playground, the things that happen in the workplaces, the things that happen perhaps even in the church environment. I mean, when you sit down and think about it and start to add those up, you know, those are traumas with a little t that eventually, you know, add up and bring about anxiety, depression. And because a lot of us are not very self-aware as people of actually what these things mean to us, we end up, and we come from cultural backgrounds where, you know, we are not encouraged to seek help through therapy. We end up bottling up a lot of these issues, and eventually we end up in a crisis situation. And that really saddened me.
Yes.
That was really an eye-opener when I was training.
Yeah, thank you so much. There's just so much again in that, and people are saying things in the chat, which I'm going to get to in a moment. You know, you're saying that when you went to counseling, I wonder sometimes if this is some of the reasons why people struggle to access services. You said I had to educate them in my lived reality. And I mean, when I listened, I thought that sounds really tiring, that you have to go educate your counselor in your lived reality and the things that you need, because the truth is there are going to be assumptions that are made because the media, their stereotypes and assumptions about Black people, and especially our men. And when we talk to Emmanuel later on, I think we're talking to Emmanuel on Sunday around Black men and therapy, we know that these are some of the stuff that is attached and why people struggle to go. But as you hear, Alison, though she was aware of these things, she went, and the experience wasn't, even though she had to do this educating, the experience wasn't bad. So sometimes it's finding that right person to work with, Alison. Sometimes it's, you know, your first counselor might not be sensitive to culture and sensitive and understanding to your lived experience, and might use language that is with racist. You know, there's no sugarcoating it. Don't give up though. Don't give up not finding somebody else who could work with you, because as Alison said, sometimes it's not trauma with the big T. We work with the big T traumas, you know, but it doesn't have to be that. It's the cumulative effect of life, the little things that adds up and adds up and adds up and becomes the big thing that you're going to need somebody to work with. So Alison, my experience of counseling was really very different. As a Black woman, I'm Jamaican, moved to the UK 20 odd years ago. And when I needed a counselor, I knew what I needed. I knew I needed somebody who could understand me. And I know I wasn't going to negotiate on that. But of course, what I found was a white middle-class woman. And we worked really well together. My second counselor was a middle-class male. But he lived in the Caribbean for a while, which was a relief, because then I didn't have to explain nuances and language. And so we didn't have those barriers. So I know some of those barriers prevent people from accessing therapy. And I want to say to people who are on here today that don't allow the cumulative effect of life to get too much, so that you don't access. So in terms of stigma, Alison, do you think our community has changed? Because you talk about, just talk to, let's do it in among ourselves. Do you think that, especially moving to the UK, that we've become individualized as well, even within our communities? Because, for example, in Jamaica and, in, I'm sure, all over parts of Africa, that we have a stronger sense of community where people help each other, but here is very different. Do you think that impacts mental health and impacts how people, whether or not they access services and some of the stigmas that's around?
I think that our community here in the UK is changing. I think that obviously people are adopting more and more to the individualistic way of life. And that, there's still the collective thing going on, but then there's less of it. And even when you look at some African societies, things are changing. Society changes, and people's habits changed. I think that there's more people thinking about training as counselors, psychotherapists from within our community, which makes it more likely that you'll have a Black therapist if you search hard enough. Also, I think that there's a lot more awareness in terms of mental health, and even mental health in the Black community. I think that there's more and more awareness now, and people are, starting to feel like it's okay not to be okay. I have found personally that, when people come to therapy, or when Black people come to therapy, it's very much kept under wraps.
Yeah.
Which is quite different to my white clients who have no qualms about telling people, actually, I'm in therapy, I'm getting therapy.
Yeah.
With the Black community, it's like, okay, I can't really talk to anyone else, but I looked for you as a Black therapist because I couldn't be bothered to have to explain certain things, or because of religious beliefs, other people might not understand what I mean when I say X, Y, and Z. So I think that even if people are not overtly talking about it from within our community, I think that people are subscribing to it a lot more, and that's very encouraging to see.
It is indeed. As I go and speak, as I travel and speak, I do get to see that as well. And in the retreats, we do retreats, it's not just for Black people, but over the last 3 years and maybe 5 retreats, that's what happens, which is really encouraging. So why do you think why do we have these cultural perceptions about counseling, and how does it stack up against reality, about the reality of what it really is?
Okay, so my goodness, that's a $1 million question. Where do I start? We have a very rich history as a people. We all know that African countries were colonized. We all know that there was slave trade. We all know that we had to build resilience as a people. And, we've as a people, we've gone through, and we continue to go through difficult times. I mean, unless you haven't heard the news recently, we continue to go through very, very difficult times. And historically, the way that we have dealt with our problems has been to stick together as a community, to encourage each other as a community, and not to allow ourselves to be broken, in quotes. And so that's almost become our pride, as in, we've got this, we can do this, and we'll do it together. I suspect, obviously, we've also got, as a people, we're quite spiritual, we're quite religious as a people. And that, for a lot of people, means, if you've got faith, if you've got God, you don't need to be depressed about anything. You don't need to be anxious about everything, because you can just pray about everything, right? And everything's going to be okay. So I think those are some of the backdrops of where the stigma has come from. And over time, we have developed, when you live in a society where there's injustice, where there's unfairness, we develop a mistrust of the majority of the population, because actually, how am I going to talk to this person of this race when with all of these things happening around us? And I think there's that mistrust from experiences. And as a result, for various reasons, we've decided, okay, we've got to be strong as a people. We've got to be resilient as a people. We've got to stand up for ourselves, and we don't allow anybody else to come in. But then over time, that's morphed into something that's quite, that's been quite detrimental, because as you and I know, Joanna, emotions are things that are natural and normal, and it's our way. It's, as human beings, emotions tell us that there's something that's not quite right, and that we need to do something about it. So if we're sad, if we're afraid, if we're happy, if we're angry, these are natural emotions, and it's the way in which we respond to them that matters. But we will have these emotions. But then in the process of being strong people, in the process of being resilient, in the process of keeping our business to ourselves, we don't realize that we don't necessarily have the skills to help each other. And so a lot of us have buried, a lot of us have suppressed the difficult emotions, not talk about them, not express them. Culturally, in a lot of parts of the Caribbean and Africa, men should be tough, men shouldn't cry, men should be strong, and men should man up, basically. And that stops them from being able to really express grief, for example. I know that in certain parts, when somebody dies, it's like, oh, don't cry, you're a man, you're strong. And so what happens to all of these emotions? They get suppressed, they don't get addressed, they don't get dealt with. And eventually that just gets magnified into something really, really, really bad for our mental health.
Break down all those kind of stuff.
And that's the reason why a lot of us, a lot of Black people end up in psychiatric hospitals, being sectioned in a crisis situation, because there's only so much the brain can absorb.
That's right. That's right.
So I would just say, look, these stigmas came from a good place, originated from a place of strength, from a positive place. However, we need to reevaluate each one of them in different circumstances and ask ourselves, is it appropriate to keep this in? Is it appropriate not to seek help, not to talk to anybody about this? What will the consequences be eventually? How am I feeling? Listen to your body, listen to yourself, and ask yourself, is this fair on me? Am I helping myself? Because at the end of the day, it's your life, and you're living the life. And the service that is provided in therapy is confidential. It's a confidential service. We don't go around telling people, guess what? This person was my client, that person was my client. So you don't need to carry that problem with you and keep the stigma up. You can talk about it and nobody has to know about it. But yeah, just to answer your question, that's where it all comes from. It comes from faith, it comes from culture, it comes from history, and all sorts of things. And I would say, yes, a lot of it came from a good place, but actually a lot of it is not good for us.
I love how you frame that, Alison. I really do love how you frame it. The strength that we have and we talk about that sometimes stops us from accessing therapy, it came from a good place. It came from a place where our forefathers had that community. They talked to each other, they shared, things was different. But as the world changed, and as also we move away from family and friends and close ties, and we're forming relationships in a country thousands of miles from where we live, just that on its own mean that we have to challenge those things that we've always taken for granted and look at them again.
Absolutely.
When I moved to the UK 20 odd years ago, I needed somebody to talk to, because it was such a massive difference for me, and the adjustment period was so difficult, and it is difficult for a lot of people. So I love how you frame that. Let's reevaluate it. Let's reevaluate where that came from, and let us look at it again, and find somewhere to work through what we need to work through. And you said something else that really triggered a thought for me and a memory that I have when I'm marketing my retreats. I always get this, Alison, not wanting people to know that I am broken. People will say, I didn't want to come to counseling because I didn't want people to know that I'm broken. I didn't want to accept that I'm broken. I mean, I don't use broken anyway, but that's the perception that people have. And there's this fear that because of the narrative in our community, there's this fear that, will I be the only one that isn't okay? And if somebody else, if so-and-so is okay, they seem to be coping. Am I the only one that's not coping? So I really like how you frame that the stigma doesn't stack up against reality. It doesn't. So if you need help, please do get help. So I'm going to go look what people are saying in the chat. If you have any questions, there's a Q&A section that you can put them in, or you can write your comments in the chat to all panelists or attendees, or you can just write them to all panelists and just Alison and myself will see them. So somebody said, everyone should have counseling. It's a gift and a blessing. Our mindset as BME mostly hinders access to the liberating benefits of counseling. I completely agree. Can you explain to listeners what the small t is, Alison? I think we talked about the cumulative effect of life, but can you please explain it a little bit more? The small
Okay.
t. What's the big T and what's the small t?
The big T is it's a major event. It's a major event that affects us psychologically. So as human beings, the brain is an amazing powerhouse, and the brain has different parts and different functions. And there's a part of the brain that deals with emotions like anger, like fear, and all of that. And sometimes things will happen. So for example, as an example, I'll use sexual abuse as an example. That's a major event where, you know, if somebody's sexually abused, raped, or anything, sometimes your brain will not be able to process what's just happened. And so that event remains in your mind and keeps getting played back over and over to you. And that's what we call post-traumatic stress disorder. That's when the parts of the brain that should absorb the information, process the information, store it as memory, is unable to do that. So then what happens is you get flashback, you re-experience that traumatic event, that horrible event. Sometimes the event is not as traumatic as a sexual abuse incident. It could just be somebody calling you a name. It could just be somebody giving you a funny look or saying something in passing. That's not something that's going to stop you in your tracks or make you cry for days and days, but that's something that your brain registers and stores as well as and considers it an unfair event. And so over time, it takes its toll on you. So the little t are the things that are not very major, so to speak, but then over a period of time will have an impact on how you start to view yourself, what you start to think about yourself, what you do or what you don't do. And sometimes the things you think, the things you feel, the things you do or don't do enables you to maintain a cycle that keeps that problem going, and sometimes will escalate into an even bigger problem. So a lot of people who have self-esteem issues might be because, you know, they've not really had the attention they needed as children, or not been really told that they are valued and loved and appreciated. All of the little things that people may not stop and say, oh my goodness, you've been attacked or you've been abused. But you know, you accumulate it in your mind, and over a period of time, the end result could be depression, the end result could be anxiety, and those two things combined will land you in a place where you've got very low self-esteem, for example, or other mental health issues.
Thank you, Alison. I think, you know, that explains well the big T and the small t. And I hope as people listening just know that both are worthy of getting help with. So somebody said that it was a major difficulty for them as Black people are mainly English speakers, counselors, etc., get there was a cultural Black background? Sorry, I'm not sure I understand that. So if that was a question or a statement, could you please just say it again? Thank you. Okay, thank you everyone for the counselors. Oh yeah, one stereotype, Black people think that counseling is for crazy people. And that's a really damaging stereotype, that it is difficult, because what it does is stop those people who really need it to get help. And yeah, and sometimes people wait too late to access support, and then things are out of their hands and they're being sectioned. And I suppose part of the motive for this conference is that we would have these conversations, we would talk about it and help to hopefully normalize it for people, so that those who need it, it's okay to not be okay and to get help when you need it. I worry about BME people, teenagers and young adults who struggle with challenges they face as they try to establish their identity and career, but keep it quiet. How can parents and the community help without then fearing to appear vulnerable at a time when they maybe feel that they're mature and can deal with a lot of stuff? I feel like that's two questions in one, but it's a really, really good question. So let's do the first part first, Alison. I worry about BME people, teenagers and young adults, maybe in particular this person is asking about, who struggle with the challenges they face to establish identity and career.
I worry about them too, because I've got two.
I've got two teenagers. Yes, it is. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think that it starts with us. It starts with us as parents. It starts with us being educating our young people about our history, about where we come from, educating them about our cultures, and why we do what we do as a community, educating them that, being Black is beautiful. Okay, I think that for a long time, as a people, we've almost been made to apologize for being a people, for being Black, and for being from the cultures that we come from, or the countries of ethnicity. One of the things that I learned was, most of the world's population is dark skinned. Okay, there is absolutely nothing wrong with being Black. And there's nothing wrong with being born into wherever you're being born into, what family you're being born into. And that whole validation as parents to our young people, teaching them about our history, teaching them about, our cultures, celebrating, not just in October when we've got Black History Month, but all the time, every day, telling them they're beautiful, taking them to parts of the world where we come from. I think that that's very important. That sense of identity is very, very important.
Yeah. You're right. And the rest of the question is about vulnerability and having our children establishing their identity and the struggles that parents feel about that. And I've had this, Alison, where parents not wanting their teenagers or their young adults, because I don't work with younger than 18, their young adults to access counseling for fear of so-and-so knowing. And because they don't want so-and-so to know, they stop their young people from accessing counseling. Breaks my heart, because when our young people are going through identity crisis and different things that are going on, they will need somebody to talk to. And sometimes that somebody is not us. But one thing I'll say as well is the ability to establish relationships with our young people in order for them for us to be the go-to place for them to come and talk to, so that we can direct them to appropriate places. I have a course, Parenting After Trauma, that I teach parents how we deal with the stuff that we go through, so that we can hear our young people. And I like to give away. So as I saw that question, I thought, if there's a parent here who want that course, I'll let you have it for free. It's a 4-part course. If you need it, I'll let you have it for free. I sent you an email this morning, joan@woundsandScars.com. Email me and I'll send you the link to access it, because we need to be able to, we have to deal with our own stuff, Alison, to be able to hear our young people. And
Absolutely.
if we don't deal with our own stuff, and if the stigma that's in our community means that we didn't get the help when we need it. When our young people hit teenage and they're going through that stage of biological development and identity has been established, we won't be able to hear them. We'll shut them down, and we know that young people and mental health, that's rising. So
and I have to say there that, you know, listen, everyone needs somebody.
absolutely.
Okay, everyone needs somebody. We all go through periods in our lives where we have really tough times, but sometimes it's even tougher as a Black person. And the more reason why we need the support from therapy or help or therapy groups or whatever to come together as a society or a community and help.
Yes.
Now, sometimes we're not aware that we need the help that we need. Sometimes we think that, you know, we are the grown-ups, we know everything. But all I'm going to say is, you know, book a session, sometimes maybe book half an hour trial session with a therapist just to find out what this is all about. You will be amazed at how much you learn about yourself, and that can be transferred on to the younger ones. It's self-awareness is very important. It's not just for when you have problems, it's for building you up for what you want to become as well, and for being the best parent, the best employee, the best whoever, the best Christian. Absolutely vital that we all go on a journey of self-discovery and rediscovery all the time. And sometimes you need that sounding board. You need that person who is trained. You know, it takes us years to get trained as therapists. We don't just go on training for 4 or 5 years just to sit around in a room. You know, we are trained to help. And, you know, it's quite a noble calling to be a therapist. So use the help. If there are people that can help, if there are people that you can talk to, use that and build yourself up.
Yeah, please do. So another question that's kind of relating to young people, which I'm really glad that we're talking about the young people, because our young people struggle. When I started online, I thought I was going to work with women, Black women mostly, between 45 to 60. It's not. At the last retreat that we had, Alison, it was young people in their 20s that came, 21, 25, 23. And I was just so encouraged, but I just wondered, where are your parents? You know, so another thing somebody said is that they, sometimes the behaviors that presents as problematic in young people is not necessarily problematic behaviors, but because they need help, somebody to listen to them, somebody who to not try and fix them, but to hear them and to be able to work with them. And I always say the behavior tells a story. So that's a really good question there, a really good comment. So there's a question here. Please, if I'm missing your question, just highlight it to me. There's how can you link religion and therapy?
Well, let's talk about this one, because I know that this is a subject that's talked about a lot, especially amongst Black people.
Yeah.
I would sort of answer that question with a question. How can you link medical healing and Christianity or religion?
Yeah.
You know, all of these things are the main objective is to heal. Yeah. So if you've got a broken leg, or if you've got the flu, or you've got some sort of virus, you would go to a medical doctor. You might pray about it, but then everyone would say, what did the doctor say? Okay, so medical doctors are trained to heal people physically. Therapists, counselors, and psychotherapists are trained to work with people so that mentally and psychologically and emotionally they are healed. I think that this is the biggest ministry, because actually when you look at some of the physical ailments that people suffer, it's as a result of mental, emotional, and psychological issues.
Yes.
And some of these issues, if they are dealt with from, you know, if the root causes of the issues are dealt with, you will not have people in hospitals taking all sorts of medications which have all sorts of side effects. So we are trained to understand how the brain works, how people deal with emotions, how psychologically people function, and what triggers people to do certain things, to behave in certain ways, to think in certain ways, to feel certain things. And putting all of that together, and we do actually understand some of the physical illnesses that people experience that result from psychological issues. So that's the answer. I think that God or Allah or whoever you believe in created each one of us as humans, as individuals, and gifted us with certain abilities, some to heal the body, some to help heal the mind. It's a ministry, and there's no contradiction between religion or faith and therapy. In fact, if you're a Christian, Christ is called the mighty counselor.
That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. And, you know, there's an amazing question here that I'm going to go to now. But as one of the most heartbreaking things for me, as I go around and speak and talk to young people, our young people, is in churches, is the fact that they don't feel permitted to get help because of this narrative that you shouldn't need it. And it's a damaging narrative, and I think sometimes it feeds into the language that we have overall as a community. But people, as you said, Alison, people are struggling, so we should encourage people to get support. So there's a question here.
Can I just add to that, Joanna, that they, you know, we've got Christian counselors. If you're worried about, you know, I'm a Christian or I'm a Muslim, you know, there are Muslim counselors, there are Christian counselors. They will use scripture to help you heal as well.
There you go. There's something for everybody. So there's a question here that I really like, and I wanted to know how you approach this, Alison, and I have to answer this as well as a Black counselor. Thanks for your powerful comments. My question: do you think that being trained through a white Western lens undermines the work that you do as a therapist? And I imagine undermines the work that we do as therapists with Black people because of how we were trained. I mean, we were trained in a Western society, don't we? Does that mean that does it undermine how we view the struggles that Black people has and does that mean that we're not able to work with our community as we should because of the lens that which we're trained? And I mean, I think it's a really good question because worldview is everything. Our values, everything. It's the lens that we see the world through. So what do you do as a therapist to, of course, you're Black, you grew up that way, maybe in your community, you might not live in a community that is all Black now, but I certainly don't. But so what do you do to keep your finger on the pulse of what we are going through as a people to make sure that your training doesn't undermine or I'm looking for the word, that your training doesn't
ignore
or stops you from being able to work as effectively with the nuances and the stuff that we will bring to therapy?
Okay, that's a very good question. To start with, I will say that fundamentally we are all human beings, and all humans have common needs: the need to be loved, the need to be validated, the need to be respected. We all have that need as humans, regardless of what race you are, regardless of where you come from. The crux of therapy is about attending to those needs. The crux of therapy is about being validated by being listened to. It's about being respected, no matter what your beliefs are, no matter what your background is, no matter where you come from, what your faith is, and just having a relationship that's not based on being judged as a person. Okay, so fundamentally, that's what therapy is about. It's about, you know, being heard, being validated, being respected, and being accepted as a human being, which is a need we all have as human beings, and which is what we are trained on as therapists. So that's the fundamental. Obviously, if you're from different parts of the world, there are different understandings about different things. And I suppose that's where culture comes in, because people have different ways of living life and different experiences that they share as a people.
Yeah.
And that obviously contributes to how they feel about themselves and how they view the world. But if we took those fundamental needs that all human beings have, okay, and then try to understand where they came from, how those are probably implemented or exercised, then we've got the basis. So yes, I think that it's important to understand culture, but a lot of work has been done in terms of research, in terms of various ethnic cultural backgrounds, and there's still a lot more work being done. I'm encouraged by that. This is part of that work, coming together, understanding. But I don't think that the Western education, so to speak, has skewed how we work as therapists. I think what it's done is given us an appetite to understand more about other cultures that are not Western. And indeed, the people who came up with a lot of the counseling and therapy theories understand that a lot of these theories are focused on Western culture. And so if you took that and you took your own experiences, you took your own understanding of the Black community, you would be able to empathize more with the client. You would be able to understand more, even sometimes language that's unspoken, because not everything can be expressed in English or in whatever language, but sometimes there's the communication between the therapist and client that's not necessarily spoken, and then you just understand each other. And I think all of those things make the experience richer. But we really have to understand that in order to be educated as a people, we need to make use of knowledge from every part of the world. So we can take our Western knowledge and we can sort of make that work when we work with people from other ethnic backgrounds.
Yeah.
So the short answer is, I don't think that, training here or training in the West hinders. It's up to the individual. It's whether the individual is open-minded enough or not. And that should be part of the training.
Yeah. Really good as usual. One of the additional things that I do, because I realize that as a Black woman, I can't take for granted that I understand how every Black person deal with different things. For example, grief. We're doing grief on Sunday specifically, but so as I said, I'm from Jamaica. So the way we deal with loss is completely different from, say, the client from Congo or Zambia or Nigeria or Kenya. People deal with loss in so many different ways. And so my clients sometimes educate me because I ask questions, but I know how to ask the questions. And even how we deal with things like sexual trauma, different people approach it and deal with it different ways. Everybody's context is so different. So we're constantly learning and growing and reading and doing courses and attending training and listening constantly so that we can more effectively help the people that come before us. And my hope is that all of our colleagues, whoever they are, will allow themselves to do that kind of work as well, so that as we're here trying to normalize this for people, that when our brothers and sisters go, that they'll get that kind of the support for them that is relevant and helpful. But how the individual manages it really does make a difference. Right. The last question here is, because we're going up to 1 and we're finishing at 1, so I'm aware that we won't be able to answer all of your questions, but please do come back tomorrow. I sent you the agenda in your email, so you'll be able to see. Okay. Right. I'm trying to find the question here. There's a question that I saw that I wanted to read, but I can't get back to it. But just this last question we're going to end on, everybody. How will you define a psychological problem? Is it a natural condition that can occur in anyone? Is it more spiritual, or is it a combination of the natural and the spiritual?
Is that for me to answer?
Yeah, I mean, you start and I'll answer. I'm trying to find a question here.
I would say that it's a psychological problem. It's a natural problem. It's where something's gone wrong in the brain. Sometimes the problems can be biological. Sometimes people there can be a situation where depression, for example, runs in the family, and so the people are more predisposed, so to speak, to have depression. However, if we are all in an environment where we are listened to, where we are supported, where we are empathized with, where we are accepted, where we are loved, even when we're from a background where we're predisposed to certain mental illnesses, that can compensate, that can mitigate for, those potential psychological problems. So the environment has a lot to do with it. Our relationships has a lot to do with it. How we interact with people and what we experience has a lot to do with it. Sometimes we may not be aware, but being supportive, being loved, being cared for, just the basic needs that we need as human beings, to be validated and all of that stuff, very, very important. So I would go for mainly the natural, the fact that psychological problems are natural things that happen when things go wrong in the brain. I don't dismiss the fact that there are spiritual problems out there, but I'm not a spiritual leader. And if you came to me as a therapist, I would work with you on the basis that there's what we call a neurosis, something's gone wrong, and we need to identify that and work towards, building you up as a person.
Right. Good question. And I wondered if when it means spiritual, if the person that asked the questions means that, are they meaning it's a sin problem, it's a spiritual issue, that means you don't need the help from somebody? I don't understand quite what they mean by, is it more spiritual, or is it something?
I think there are certain psychological problems, like, especially when people hear voices, and some psychological people on the spectrum, sometimes people perceive that as a spiritual problem. Like I said, I am a therapist. I will not diagnose spiritual issues, although I believe in God, but I think that a lot of the time it's more psychological. It's more stuff that can be worked through.
Questions. Let us know in the chat. We're wrapping up. We've got like 5 minutes. Let us know if some of the stigmas that you've heard, some of the conversations that happen in your community, among your peers and your friends, around why people wouldn't want to access counseling, and how throughout over the course of the conference that we can begin to address some of those questions and conversations. So the one last question says, and I don't know what we can do with this one because it's not around stigma, but perhaps a controversial question. It says, is non-standard sexual perversion or orientation related to an individual's mental state? How will society move from a heterosexual relationships to various combinations? Perhaps this applies to all. And as I said, this doesn't really relate to stigma, the BME community. No, Alison said we don't diagnose spiritual problems. I wouldn't be able to diagnose this one either, or say what the root of non-standard sexual perversion or orientation is relates to, if it's an individual's mental state or what it is. I wouldn't be able to say that, and I can stay within my limitations. I don't know what you want to do with that, Alison.
Well, I think what I would say is that if you're troubled by anything, talk to a therapist, because this forum cannot address, we cannot provide blanket responses to certain questions. The whole process of therapy, there is a process, there is a science and an art to therapy, and we work with the individual. So we can't answer that question without understanding background, without understanding, all sorts of things about you as the individual.
Or the circumstances, definitely. Thank you for that. I sent out an agenda today. I'm aware that the flyer for the conference says 10 a.m., but I sent an agenda out today. Everybody should get one. If you haven't had one, please let me know. And because the start times slightly vary, and I'm going to try and change the flyer. I didn't do it, so I'm going to try and contact the person who's done the flyer for us to see whether or not they'll be able to make those adjustments for us. but there is an agenda that I sent this morning in your emails that will tell you the start time. So for example, tomorrow we start at 12 again, and we're talking about beyond lockdown and what to expect and what to happen and how we can manage and regulate ourselves. And then at 7 p.m. we're going to talk to another therapist, and she's going to talk about appropriate services, and we're going to talk about what to look for when you wanted to find a service and to access therapy. So that's tomorrow. So we're having 2 sessions tomorrow, 12 till 1 and 7 till 8 p.m. Okay. And so on and so forth. Saturday night, Alison and I are going to be here. We're going to just be answering questions. Just so come and talk to us. Come and talk about what to expect in therapy. Come and talk to about some of the fears that you have. If you want to train as a counselor or therapist, some of the things to look for, where to find courses, and how as a community we can pull together to help each other, because that's what I know about our community. That's what I know about our community. And maybe we can pull together so that this mental health situation that is in our community, so that our Black boys and our girls, when they grow up, they can have a different narrative. The stigma that we're dealing with now, I would like for my 14-year-olds to not be dealing with it when they're 25, but it
Absolutely.
takes all of us to come together and to do something to make sure that doesn't happen. Right, great stuff. Thank you so much. Thank you. The conversation will continue tomorrow. Remember, I said the course Parenting After Trauma. If you want it, please email joanna@woundstoscars.com and I'll let you all have it for free. I run that in the community and I do it online, but as I was listening to the questions around teenagers, my heart breaks for the young people, and I want us to be able to manage ourselves as parents so that our young people can get the help that they need. So thank you so much again for being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.